So today we're just going to talk about working on trucks and cars and temperature and kind of ramble around a little bit. So I was listening to a couple other videos, and one of them was Doc Galt. And he was talking about having to work on cars and trucks and stuff when the temperatures are bad. And it seems like that's always how it works. It's either 100 or 103, or it's 10 or 0 degrees or 10 below when something breaks and you got to fix it. Now, what I've found after a lot of experience is when you're doing brake work, what happens is professionals a lot of times just change rotors and pads inside the caliper. And when they do that, they press back in the cylinders inside the caliper, but they don't bleed the system. The other thing they do is rarely do they replace these flex hoses back here. So from your caliper running back to your hard line, you're going to have flex hose here, and that's why your wheels can move up and down and your brake lines don't rupture. So what happens is once you get about 150, 200,000 miles on a lot of these older trucks, two things occur. One is with these calipers, you've got two pistons in it because this is a 1-ton truck. And what will happen is one or both of those cylinders will get some roughness in it, it'll get some debris, or it'll get rust in it, and they won't retract. And when they don't retract, they'll actually burn your rotors and pads up. You can actually set your truck on fire. And some of these Ford F-350s and bigger are famous for that. Now, the other thing that happens is with this flex hose here, there are a two-way hose. So in order for your pads to retract and your pistons to retract, you have to have good flow in both directions in these flex hoses. So what happens is these flex hoses age, the pressure from the brake system will push the brake fluid into your caliper and cause it to stop. But as they deteriorate inside, they act like a stop. And what happens is they won't let the fluid back out when you take your foot off the pedal. And that can also cause you to burn out your brake linings here. So it's best to go ahead and replace this stuff when you do your brake service around 200,000 miles. In some vehicles, it's best to replace the stuff at 100, 150,000. It just depends on the size of your pads, the size of your calipers, how many pistons you have, and your experience. Now, I find that I use my trucks in a lot of conditions that are much more severe than the cars. So a lot of times you'll have braking issues because of all the dirt, sand, and water that gets in them as you're working. So that's kind of a rambling on brakes. Now, one last thing is right here where your flex line attaches to your caliper, you can see you have a copper washer here and you have a copper washer on the other side. Now, this is what your copper washers look like, and they go on your banjo bolt. And that's what actually seals the flex hose to your brake caliper. Once you've sealed them, they'll look like this, and you can see the ridge marks on here. So what will happen is right here, you'll have ridge marks because there's little ridges machined on both pieces, and when you crush fit this, it seals up. Now, you should always have some extra of these copper rings for your particular vehicle. Because over the years, I've had two instances where this part didn't seal and I had to reseal it. Because sometimes you'll have a burr, sometimes you'll have some junk in the brake fluid that leaves debris there, or for some reason it just didn't line up and you have to do it again. So always keep some of these extra copper washers, and these are particular to your size of brake and brand of car, because you can see here we got a part number E860 for these for this F350. So when you're buying your brake calipers, you should get a set of the copper washers with it, and you also get a set with your flex hose. So if you're buying both, you got an extra set of copper washers you can use if something goes wrong when you're torquing them down. Otherwise, if you have a problem, you're going to be headed back to the auto parts store, because these copper washers are the key to sealing your flex hose to your calipers. So always save your extras, because one day you may need them. And what I find is when it's around 103, 104 outside, that's when things go wrong and you need these extra parts. Now, when we're talking about tools and we're working on vehicles, right here I got an old Craftsman USA. It's got a double end ratchet here, 18 millimeter on one side, 19 on the other. And you can see how thick these are. So this is a really strong wrench, but it was at the end of the USA production. And what they did is stop cleaning up the castings. So the castings are rough and the chrome plate is not very thick on it. So I've noticed a lot of these over the years will rust. So you have to keep an eye on that. Now this is a gear wrench ratcheting wrench. And you can see how much thinner this is in the width of it. You can see how much thinner it is on the width. Now the gear wrench is much more comfortable to use, but this is actually a much stronger wrench. And just kind of looking around, I don't know if they even make these double sides anymore. But that's kind of interesting to see. Now, when I'm working on a lot of stuff, I like to have a 3/4 ratchet, and that way I can loosen some of the big stuff by hand, and it doesn't interfere with my arthritis or some of the joint problems I have. I like to use this better than a rattle gun, because when I'm taking things apart and putting them together, I have more of a feel of how the threads are acting on the bolts. And when I use this, I don't destroy anything, and I get a good feel for how tight things are when they come off and when I put them back on. So I like to use this 3/4 handle with the adapter to give me a little more leverage and feel rather than using a rattle gun. Now, when we're talking about working on trucks, another big difference nobody talks about is working on a truck in a garage or on a concrete platform versus working on a truck in the field. Now, having a construction background, I've worked on a lot of equipment and trucks in the field, and that is a much more dangerous situation than working on a concrete pad. And the reason is most jack stands and jacks are not designed to use in your driveway, on gravel, on dirt. They're designed to work on a concrete pad. And what happens is the legs or sides of them fail when you're working on dirt and they give way. So sometimes you have to use cribbing in the field rather than regular jack stands. Because if you look at the instructions and the limitations on your equipment, your jacks and your jack stands, and see if they have to be supported by a concrete pad. That's critical. The next thing we want to look at is the easy way to get killed. Now, I like to put cardboard down and work on top of that, but you never put anything like cardboard or plastic under the tires or your jack stands or your jacks. You only leave a little bit of cardboard for you to lay on. My brother, who's retired from the fire service, several times in his career, they've had to jack vehicles up off the top of people that killed them. And one man was working on a bus, and what happened is he put plastic down, drove the bus on the plastic, because he had to do a lot of stuff under the bus. And even though the tires were chocked and everything, the bus rolled because the plastic provided a slippery surface, and it killed him. and they had to jack the bus up and then drive it off of him. So when you're working on vehicles, make sure you don't put plastic under the tires, you don't put cardboard under the tires, and if you're working in a wet area, make sure you chalk all the tires. Now when I'm working in the field, I see people chalk one tire. I like to chalk a minimum of 2, preferably 3. So keep that in mind. Food for thought. And we'll see you on the next episode.